We are now at season 2 of Shivoham Lab's work and research, and this season is going to be all about dark cosmology and dark consciousness. I've had to also go through some things these past few weeks myself to be able to intuit slash transmit some of this information. So I haven't had fun being separated from this environment, but I'm so happy to be back. Let's get into it. So the topics I'm going to cover, what constitutes dark cosmology? What does darkness truly even mean? Is there an agenda behind darkness and its naming convention? Implications of darkness from the macro to the micro parts of our reality, dark consciousness and what that looks like for me, and how we can use this knowledge to build a better tomorrow. But the basics, what is darkness really and who defined it? Let's break it down. So, in order to say the term darkness, there's a reference point to light because words exist in relation to one another. So, where did the division between what is dark and light take place? Do we all even agree on it? And what do the cosmos have to do with dark consciousness, anyways? So let's start and work backwards. Dark consciousness has the idea of dark versus light in consciousness, which stems from the concept of what is good or bad versus right or wrong. And that kind of implies a moral code or order when you think of right and wrong. An order comes from some type of governance, ruling, and power. And governance usually gets tied into politics. Politics comes from how you want to work and rule with people in society and the world. And that rule book generally is tied to religion. Dun, dun, dun. So let's see what people were up to before politics and religion. The closest human beings that match today's modern day human beings started existing around 160,000 to 200,000 years ago. They were in hunter-gatherer societies, and each society had about 20 to 50 people. And they were typically nomadic peoples who were aligned with the seasons for food, but they were basically always on the run to make sure they were getting their resources and needs met. Their belief systems at the time were also based on needs. So at the time, the styles of farming, the cycles of weather patterns, working with animals, agriculture, all of that is what inspired this for these people. So you would see a lot of, shamanism and animism. With this nomadic lifestyle, you don't really have the time to focus on anything other than survival. So you're not really thinking of explicit moral codes of how people should behave. The only thing you're thinking about is like kill or be killed. So then, how did politics and religion come to be? Agriculture. Oh my God, it started with food. That's crazy. Let's get into why. When human beings brilliantly figured out how to domesticate animals and take advantage of resources around them with nature systems, they were able to have more time and settle down more. As settlements became more permanent, they became civilizations. And there was a video I was watching that framed civilizations as just organized political environments. There's a reason why most civilizations occur in nearby river valleys. The nourishment from that water was the perfect foundation for all sorts of growth of food. And then irrigation allowed settlers to spread to Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia just means area between rivers. And this is kind of where the first city-states start emerging. Polytheism dominated. And part two into how it came to tie in politics and religion with ruling and governing powers, there can be a push for what moral code should we all agree on? What should we all be following so we could work together in society perfectly? Perfectly. Well, humans naturally look to their belief systems. That's where it all started. And monotheism, there's Zoroastrianism, which is the first documented official monotheistic religion, but also just kind of looking at a little bit of world history. I'm not perfect at this, so correct if this is wrong. But Akhenaten wanted to focus on worshiping the sun god Aten. Actually, I believe his original name was Akin, and he added the Aten at the end to signify that devotion to the sun god. Mesopotamia was the start of a lot of empires being established and a variety of cultures and languages spreading alongside belief systems. And one of the most beautiful things, you can do your own deep dive if you want, is just how much we have influenced each other from the origin around throughout the world, throughout history. We're so much more similar than we are different. So it actually made me pretty emotional to learn more about the River Valley civilizations again. But yeah, this tr naturally translated into empires established what they believed to be the highest order to follow. Typically, you'd see these Christian and Islamic empires coming through, and as empires grew, so did the need to stabilize the power through unified belief. So within Abrahamic faiths, there were different forms of mysticism and senses of direct realization of God consciousness. These mystical experiences, they didn't need any form of external structure or priests or temples. So it could be seen as dangerous. And the darker cosmologies, the concepts behind them, death, void, formlessness, they were buried or demonized. One, you don't really know what to do with them, so you just put it to the side. And two, if it threatens structured hierarchies and what we do know, then you need to suppress those types of thoughts. So all that's in the past, but how did we get to where we're at today? So, in the 1620s, a group called the Puritans escaped the Anglican Church in England in hopes to purify those rituals of all places in Virginia. And Puritan theology, kind of hypocritical because they were affected by this as well, but they had the mindset of if you don't like it here, go somewhere else or you get executed. English colonization was huge at the time, and Native American presence was still essential to this development. However, Native resistance ended in 1676 when Metacom, the leader of the Native resistance group, was killed in King Philip's War. In 1681, you see a little bit more tolerance with William Penn establishing Pennsylvania. Penn for the name, Sylvania meaning forest. This land contained the Quaker religion, aka the Religious Society of Friends. Very interesting name. These people were pacifist, tolerant of other beliefs, and actually got along with Native Americans, but slavery still existed. So we don't want to over romanticize the past. And then, we saw some progress with the Enlightenment period in the 1600s through the 1700s, establishing a mindset of scientific observation, reasoning, questioning religious systems, and rethinking government, which was a huge threat to major powers. In the 1730s and 1740s, we had the First Great Awakening, and there was an encouragement to have that personal connection to God. And preachers were beginning to challenge formal religious practices, which led to having diverse denominations of Christianity in particular. And in the early 1800s, there is the Second Great Awakening, which emphasized action alongside faith. So that all sounds like it's heading in the great direction, but how are we still here today? So Thomas Jefferson kind of put out this idea, I think it's like in the 1790s to 1802, during that time, a separation of church and state to support the freedom of speech. But then during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, we, for morale, adopted the "In God We Trust" phrase. It became our political motto and a way to feel proud to be American. So, even without intensive religious intervention and having some type of religious tolerance, you can still have purity politics exist, even if it's not purity culture or religious culture, excuse me. So, easiest example, desire, sensuality, self-love is seen as terrible, it's demonized, yet we hypersexualize everything completely, on the other side while shaming that one thing here. When we are presented with a problem of darkness within a person, we don't look at that as an opportunity to alchemize. We just kind of put them out over to the side, get them away from ourselves, but they still exist, and what you suppress will still be acted upon. Virtue signaling, performative care of others are still forms of trying to look pure and perfect without getting much done. So it seems that the US never really separated morality from governance when it came to religion. It just rebranded Christian moral codes into civic virtues. So when we have so much of this structure that involves governing and moral code and law and like absolutism, but we don't allow people to have a sense of discernment because societal shame is a huge thing, what can happen? So the pendulum would always swing back. It actually continues swinging back and forth in these cycles. And that's what makes me wonder if true progress under our current reality and its systems are actually taking place. Is it actual true progress? So I was just thinking about what it means to be a pendulum, the concept of it, right? The concept of swinging and being able to go back and forth. You need to be able to go back, right? But how do you know where to get back to? So there's some reference point that's still alive. So I think these systems actually kind of trap you. You feel like you can move between the spectrum, but there's still upper and lower or left or right limits, right? And the current systems rely on someone being a predator and someone being the prey. Even when we think about reparations and accountability for horrible things that have happened in the past, a lot of people often feel fear. Why? We may be implicitly aware of overcorrectness in society. Maybe that's something we would do and we project that onto others. And maybe we're taught that taking care of others means that we would be neglected. But who told us that? Where do these narratives come from? This is the most basic example, but like if you think about hyper individualism that exists in society today, I'm sure it's a response. Most things in society today are a response, but like hyper obsession with community and looking cool and being involved in crowds that were not for you, instead of being encouraged to have discernment and try out different friend groups or be in different situations, you were kind of forced to be in one place all the time. And RIP to anyone who really stood out from a crowd and they were going to be constantly bullied. And you had to numb out your individual expression. You could have been physically harmed. You could have been, neglected. And now, in response to that, we just want to create our safe haven. But that also doesn't do the best for us, too, right? Because we're so locked up in our own solitude and things going absolutely our way that we forget that sometimes annoyance is a small price we pay for a sense of community. How can we stop the swinging altogether? So, what we really need, if we want to stop the swinging, we got to understand where it even began. How did pendulum behavior start? My guess is that it was all rooted in the ego. If we had started more from a soulful way of thinking, there wouldn't be a constant back and forth happening. Starting from the ego and the mind and the identity always seems to encourage reactivity. And here are some examples I've sort of written down, and you can point to any point in the timeline of history and see a group of people embodying these traits and mindsets, right? But outside of starting from the ego, what else do you see that these things have in common? They're externalized forms of everything, or the concept of self, to satiate the ego. When we are associating with any form of land, we think that land is us. It's a part of us. We identify with our race. We are these things. Yes, I am aware. What I am trying to get people to see too is to sort of push beyond the way we can kind of feel safe being inside of our meat suits. All of these things, even with religion, there's this idea of a savior outside of you that understands you, the self, and gets you, or like your possessions, they have these memories attached. Again, nothing wrong with that, right? I am just pointing out what happens when things get quite extreme, which is generally the trend you can end up in, especially with the society that feeds off of this, as we'll get into later in this lecture. There's also a disconnect from the divine feminine. I have talked about this before. I would encourage you to do your own deep dive as well. This is not about conservative gender roles, but a cosmic, expressive, creative, intuitive force that is integral to the cosmos. And when there's no sense of that fluidity and understanding in between rigid structures, we create this zombie-like existence. So we have structure without purpose. We have goals with no direction. So, what could we do that removes the ego, invites our own sense of sovereignty, self-governance, led from the soul, and everyone knowing how to do that? And what would rebalance this connection to said divine feminine? I say we need an Enlightenment Renaissance hybrid. Enlightenment means also listening to scientific reasoning. Let's not conflate science with scientism, as I'm sure people are aware. When you conflate two things, one is more extreme and one is not, it can cause a lot of problems. Okay, so my hot take is science and spirituality are actually best friends. Spirituality internalizes that cosmic consciousness, and science internalizes personal power and understanding. And when you're educated, when you have an abundance mindset, when you're devoted to understanding yourself and your place in this world, you are much more difficult to control. Science with ego, however, becomes scientism, and spirituality with ego becomes spiritual narcissism. So I say, in the purest form, science and spirituality are fully removed from the ego and in pursuit of great cosmic truths. I say that spirituality is actually highly complex, non-linear, meaning non-linear existing outside of space-time, science, and science is just that concept linearized. As I was working on these slides, I was watching a bunch of videos and I had learned too that modern day science actually came from philosophy first. And that philosophy was called natural philosophy. This makes sense. You're observing your environment, you're engaging and thinking of ways things interact with each other and with us and what kind of impact it can have, and you try to test it out. That starts turning into science. And a lot of my basis is cosmic consciousness philosophy stemming from tantric philosophy. So it actually ties in this concept very well together. And that would be the Enlightenment piece. For the Renaissance piece, that would be the ability to sort of connect back to that sense of feeling that we all need, right? It would bring back the arts and encourage everyone to behave from the creator, not the consumer frequencies. So just for yourself, asking yourself, like, when was the last time you painted, wrote a poem, sang, played music, engaged, even attended a play? When would have been the last time you engaged in something artistic in your life? And compare that to the last time you decided to numb your feelings instead with either substance or doom scrolling on social media or distracting yourself with reality TV. When was the last time that you sat with your feelings and worked with those internal family systems through the full spectrum of your consciousness, from darkest dark to lightest light? And conversely, when was the last time you decided it was best to ignore those feelings and suppress them? I love Carl Sagan, and this quote rings so true because I myself am trying to get to the bottom of so many things. And so the suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or in politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there's no place for it in the endeavor of science. So let's get into the meat of it. Let's talk on dark cosmology first. Um, and how it seems to make up the majority of the universe, and it seems that we don't know very much about it. So dark energy is the content of dark energy is unknown, but seems to contribute to the acceleration of the universe. And seems that recently it's been discussed that maybe we can take out the need for dark energy altogether by approaching the theory of relativity and gravity in a different way. But dark energy was measured by checking the redshift of spiral galaxies, and redshift is just wavelengths of light being stretched due to distance from objects, which makes them go towards the red end of the light spectrum. On The red light has longer wavelengths than blue light. So with blue shift, if the light is moving, light sources move towards us, it compresses the light waves, causing that blue shift. Dark matter is an invisible hypothetical form of matter that does not interact with light or other electromagnetic radiation. Dark matter is more so implied by gravitational effects that cannot be explained by general relativity. And timescape cosmology is kind of the one that sort of fights dark energy a little bit. But the perceived acceleration and expansion of the universe is not due to dark energy, but rather as a result of time flowing at different rates in different regions of the universe. And if you remember when I had talked about the 14 lokas and talking about the inversely proportional relationship that the greater the physical density of that dimension of the cosmos, the lower the frequency of the the consciousness that can exist there. The underpinning of panpsychism is the underpinning of everything, excuse me. And so that is why I am bringing up the term the consciousness would be lower if the density is higher. And this could link very well into timescape cosmology. And so this kind of disproves or negates dark energy due to time dilation effects, gravitational effects. And black holes are still a hot topic, in particular, the information paradox. So, semi-classical gravity is valid on scales where gravitational and quantum effects are separate, and you can isolate and check them out in different scenarios. But quantum mechanics exist everywhere and affect everything from minute to large scale systems. They're unitary and therefore all could be reversible, which is what makes black holes in particular, and everything I'm bringing up here in this list of dark cosmology, as very much interactive with the substrate of consciousness in the universe, and how the more information we can get on these, the more we can apply it to learn about ourselves. How space and time are realized continue to be one of the greatest mysteries, but in my I think second to last lecture, I was suggesting, no, it was the most recent one, that it is consciousness which gives rise to space-time. And in accordance with the Sri Yantra, time is dependent on a space existing. So there is that, but we also know that like we can speak for our own selves and our own consciousness and what reality that gets created. But there's almost like little handshake agreements, which we'll get into in future lectures, where there's a collective consciousness that kind of impacts what's going on, the holistic reality as well. Discussing the impact and range of gravity as a consequence of space-time, and how it affects the physical universe and the underlying consciousness of everything in the cosmos, and what the upper limits are of the theories we have today. And maybe where some of these theories drop off is where we need to maybe stop looking at external understanding of the cosmos and look sort of to internal applications. From the tantric perspective, Tantra is a lot about death, scream, hate, just as much as it is about live, laugh, love, which is what I love about it so much. So there are a couple points I wanted to bring up. Just as an overview, the concept of Aghora Tantra. Aghoras view darkness, death, and decay as sacred, not to be avoided, but to enter fully, because liberation lies through the cremation ground, not away from it. In this lineage, darkness is not evil, it is unfiltered truth, where illusion is burned away. The Mahavidyas are the 10 tantric goddesses. You can think of them as the emo versions of goddesses you would see typically in Hinduism. But remember, we are not trying to talk about religion and the paradigms that shows up today in society. We are talking about what these things symbolize for us in our consciousness and why we sometimes look towards a particular form to evoke a certain way of thinking. And these are the emo versions for a reason, to say that these two are considered divine. Asuras and devas. One of my lectures I talked to about the vibratory boundary of the cosmos and like unchecked raw energetic power and how that can lead to immediate dissolution of the cosmos. So having that vibratory boundary, expansion, some contraction, some stabilization, they are both necessary to create the universe as we see it today. But in cosmology and mythology, you might see asuras described as demons and devas being gods, but this isn't a form of moral absolutism. It's just mythology explaining astrophysical phenomena. And they both come from the same source and they're necessary for cosmic play. And in Tantra, that's known as Leela. But darkness in this case also doesn't exist as an opposition to light, but as a complement and a counterbalance. It is a very real part of our existence and a very real part of God consciousness that we should not be ignoring, especially considering how much it affects us and how those people can harm and affect others. And the basis of all of this comes from non-dual Shiva Tantra. This path sees all of reality, light and dark, pleasure and pain, as manifestations of a singular divine consciousness, Shiva, just cosmic consciousness. There's no good or bad, only contracted or expanded awareness. And darkness, or shunya, the concept of zero, is actually the womb of pure potential before differentiation. When I look up at the stars, I never like to say, look at how small your problems are, but think about how big your life can be. I feel that this is such a brilliant quote. It's inclusive. There's no toxic positivity. It helps you see the beauty of the cosmos and making room for you. I wonder who the genius is who came up with such a brilliant quote. Oh my goodness, it's me. It's me. I like saying this because no one wants to feel like their problems are being trivialized. Everything is relative that we go through. And of course, when you do comparisons, then you can say this person has gone through worse or not as bad or super great life versus not such a great life. But everybody deserves to have that opportunity to look up at the stars and know what is possible to have and what can be alchemized, because we learn about ourselves the more we spend time with that which is out there. Okay, here's where I'm going to get real serious about building a case. I'm not trying to have a theory of everything. I am trying to have a theory of that same something that exists in everything. So my question here is, could there be a quantum for consciousness, specifically human consciousness? So mind you, this implies that I'm seeing panpsychism as the truth. I understand this. This makes sense to me considering that everything has, and everyone has one thing in common, that they have different experiences of space-time. So much like how a graviton is said to be the quantum for gravity, where gravity is also a vibratory language of the cosmos, could be the curvature of space-time, could be a consequence of it. The proposed form is graviton. Um, I'm also suggesting that there can be something similar for pure consciousness or spanda, which is Sanskrit for vibration. It can have its own specifically for human consciousness. This would be my attempt to combine tantric wisdom and philosophy with modern scientific cosmology. The Spandakarika, or the doctrine of vibration, discusses the principles of the cosmos at the macro and the micro scale. And it says that it relies on creation, preservation, and destruction. This is a commonality between everything throughout the cosmos. So you can't just talk about theory without a practical way of seeing how we can measure and take a look at things, which tends to be a huge problem considering measurement is the finicky thing here. Can we monitor this quantum of consciousness within our minds with the concept of thoughts? Since we keep talking about how thoughts create our reality, what can we understand more deeply about thoughts? How can we really take this to the next level? What if thought is structured like dark matter? I can't be certain. I'm just thinking out loud here. It doesn't interact electromagnetically. People say it's an emergent property of neurons firing. It's just an energetic thing. It's massless, but it could be gravitationally and informationally active. So we may have to assume that thoughts have mass. Not sure again how to test this, but I'm trying to really get serious about what that would look like so that it can be considered part of matter and be legitimately tracked and measured and all that, right? To pursue this framework, we'd have to explore whether thoughts behave like bounded energy packets akin to quanta, which would require them to exhibit those measurable properties. So right now, my current example is creation, preservation, and destruction, but we would also have to work under energy conservation laws because are thoughts created, or does everything already exist in this universal field of consciousness and we're just choosing which thoughts we're like preserving, and then creation and destruction is more so like what we allow to filter in and filter out, right? A couple lectures ago, I brought up that when we do run EEGs on people, there is multiple methods to go about fractal dimensional analysis, and those who are on psychedelics will exhibit higher fractal values to indicate maybe more of a broadened sense of consciousness being in the mind, versus lower would say you're kind of more at a maybe neurotypical level. So, I mean, I don't know, just out of curiosity, if neuroscience and the pineal gland and all these, ideas that we have about what connects us from being here to something out there, what if we start the measurement from there and work our way backwards or outwards? Is there a way we could maybe locate, track, monitor, and measure? And again, we would have to reevaluate what measurement looks like. This quantum starting from there and link it as that common thread throughout the cosmos and space-time. One thing I would also like to add to is there can be a different form that this takes up. Like gravitons also are still on in their works of whether to be absolutely proven or disproven, right? Similar thing here, like how can we know where a thought is going when we track it backwards? Like the data of that would look different in the way it's encoded. But again, you guys are all just sort of witnessing me trying to put research cases together. So I am aware that like you can't have the same thought that exists in a human mind in the same form outside of the human brain. So that would be a really interesting problem to take a look at too. I mean, all of this is interesting. Dark consciousness. What do I mean by this? Here's how I want to define it. It is behavior or mindset that defies what's considered typical or neurotypical. including but not limited to, not an official definition, okay? So I've talked a lot about reality-based disorders where I want to specialize in them, and you can look at the list over here of what constitutes that. But dark consciousness also has more to it. There's intrusive thoughts that can't seem to be put under control. I've had my fair share of not only dark intrusive thoughts, but also sleep paralysis demons and reality-based disorders. There's borderline personality disorder. There's thoughts of self-harm or harming others consistently, abuse of the three kinds, going against humanitarian rights, international law. And I just want to say that whenever we take a look at the above and we decide to like go against it and say that like, oh no, that's like too negative for me, but it's not an energetic boundary, it's just a form of escapism, suppressing that, whether you do it in a society or whether you do it within yourself, makes it more likely to be acted upon with the right triggers. So we talked a lot about earlier how religion and politics are inextricably tied. And even if there's supposed to be this separation of church and state that I'm not really seeing, notice how the purity culture will still affect mental wellness culture and how there can be a stigma around these things. There's nothing wrong with having this awareness. It's actually where I end up losing empathy is when people use that as their reasoning for doing terrible things to other people, right? But we should not be ignoring. I want you to know anybody can kind of be subject to any of these things, right? It just takes the right environment. It really takes you being pushed to like the most torturous limits. I'm not saying you should welcome and accept all the darkness in the world because first of all, there's going to be people who will be obtuse on purpose. Second of all, we're still working on the whole discernment thing. I do notice the collective is waking up based on how things are operating in the world, but we should look at everything as an opportunity, as potential. We're scientists of so many wonderful things. And I think if we can apply that, I really believe to the darkness state of the world, we would open brand new doors for humanity. So, when it comes to dark cosmology and dark consciousness, I have noticed watching several lectures that if a problem seems too difficult to solve, too difficult meaning like, is it going to have a great return rate on investment and like funding and impact that's visible, which makes sense. I don't have that constraint because I'm unemployed and devoting my life to this. But people tend to black box it, externalize the solution, just kind of pack it up, let's go, let's hurry up and let's move on to the next thing, and ignore it until one day it has to come back, of course. So here's a really great example I'm hoping people can relate to when it comes to darkness and the very real sentiment we all have when someone that you can think of the literal worst person you've ever met in your life and wanting to see them suffer and imagining why it doesn't happen. Let's start with the philosophical basics. Okay, the concept of subject and object being separate is an illusion. Everything in your reality is part of who you are. I also dislike this. I am not going to be a hypocrite and tell people what to think and feel without acknowledging first that this is extremely difficult for me to also remember. So, when people wrong us, we want to see that karmic retribution immediately. We are linear beings. We operate with linear space-time. This makes sense. Our ego wants to see things happen in accordance to linear space-time. Otherwise, does it happen? Does it matter? Does it have any implication anymore? Karma is different. Okay, very unfortunate for me too. I am thinking of someone in my mind that is living the best life right now and has done some of the most heinous things to me, has been like literally the worst person I've ever met in my life. Just openly trying to be vulnerable so you understand that this is not something we just have to talk about. We need to be embodying and applying, and we need to be open as a society about how difficult it can be to be nonlinear beings. I've noticed that those who find out what they've got coming for them, they only find it once I have let them go. Why is this? Well, for someone to show up in your field of consciousness, there is an element of their existence which applies to you still. So, if we kind of realize subject and object separation is an illusion, that we're actually all one with what's in our environment, then if we witness them receive their pain, then we would suffer as well, but not in the way that you would think. I'm sure that when you see people get justice You feel that sense of safety, but that's the end result that you want. You want that sense of safety and knowing that a moral code is being followed in time for you to check that it's, okay from the human mind. The real justice only takes place when we are not looking because our reality becomes upgraded. When you do enter another level of consciousness, those experiences aren't invited in. And remember, I talked about creation, preservation, and destruction as the forces of the cosmos that exist, okay? And sometimes we'll refer to Brahman or Paratman as the mind of the universe, right? So let's apply that to our thoughts too. Creation, preservation, and destruction. If that creates if that constitutes a universe, and we think about the universe in our mind, well, if somebody is able to be like created and we can see them, they are still a part of our mental field and therefore are preserved and they're a part of our universe. It is only when they are not part of the creation, preservation, or destructive process that we are witnessing that they are now outside of our universe. So it is pretty tough to accept. And something I had to come to terms with last year as well. When you are 100% mad at your enemies, it's because you believe that 100% of what's done is their fault. And I want to talk about the word fault here because I don't mean for it to come from a place of shame, but we may think that they are the only catalyst and the only instigators of our negative experience. So if we can see where we may have a hand sometimes, it will help us feel a lot more empowered in better decision making rather than feeling like we are eternally doomed. How I know the above to be true. The reason this video took so long to even come out is because I was in a rough situation the last week, living wise, and it was dark, creepy. It was bringing up elements of my CPTSD. I was really waking up with a knot in my stomach in the morning and in the evening. And I was witnessing a person that very much created an environment where it just felt like hell for me. And this person is constantly, also complaining. They're saying they have some pretty messed up viewpoints about, women and all of that. And they are very, very old and talking about everything that's gone wrong in life. And this person has continued to make horrid decisions. And as they go along telling me these stories, I'm processing it and I'm noticing where they wasted time, where they didn't work on themselves and that impacted into their poor decision making. Then they have great generalizations of hating groups of people and deciding what they should and shouldn't do with their lives or their bodies and how all of that should be dictated. I mean, I won't get into more details. It was just pretty gross. And I sat there thinking, this person is in suffering. This person is miserable, but they don't see it that way. And I was talking to a really wonderful friend, and he's so smart. And even from his angle, he began to ask me, well, Shivani, is that person suffering while living life, or is that person living life while I'm suffering watching them? So that experience taught me that even if we are watching people suffer, they may not realize that's what's going on for them. That's just their way of being. So when we look at like justice taking place, it's only justice really in our own eyes, and we become part of that suffering as well. My reality ultimately got affected by that. So that was a pretty powerful real life example of this realization. Now, I want to talk about the greatest vehicles of for the entropy of consciousness, which could ruffle a couple feathers, but fear not, I will get deep diving into this. Um, so, social media, political narcissism, identity politics obsession, and the removal of multiplicity of consciousness. Let's start with social media and its pros. I think it has been so wonderful for many valid reasons. We've been able to get truthful documentation of people describing and showing in real time suffering what's going on in other parts of the world. And we may not see that depending on what country you're in or what kind of censorship there is or what kind of agendas there can be within the government. What are we not allowed to see, right? So I think social media has been great for that. For small businesses and their growth, so you can support local farmers, local markets, local anything. just to give them more recognition and, just contribute more to people engaging with the creative frequencies. I love that. And anecdotal experiences and tips to help people in different life circumstances when oftentimes we feel alone, that we're the only ones who are this crazy. But no, other people have shared experiences too, and they can talk about how they've grown and they've evolved and what you can look out for, and this well-meaning intention to connect people across the globe. I use WhatsApp and FaceTime pretty regularly. I'm sure you guys do too. And without it, a lot of rough situations we would be trapped in would feel like we have no way to know that there's more to the world. So that was my list of pros. The list of cons, as you'll see, is much longer. This is kind of an idea I had about maybe what people who are extremely wealthy, who are elite, who thrive off of controlled opposition may be doing. And take what feels good, leave what doesn't. I just ask that maybe you consider that maybe this could be going on. So first, you start as a way to connect with people abroad and mean well and get people on board with this. Over time, you see, because they're constantly on this platform, you can monitor their data and put out ads for revenue for businesses. Then people get adjusted in their nervous system slowly to more and more negativity over time. You introduce mass media and bad news to slowly get people into politics, but not in a solution-oriented, educated, informed, civil way, but in a reactionary way. You build momentum with this hatred over time, with gender, race, religious ideology, political affiliation, etc., and ensure that only extremes are what show up. You embed multifaceted modalities of enslaving people to the apps. So it makes it harder to leave it behind and have your own sovereign life. So your business could depend on it, your family connection depends on it. You believe you should get your news only from this platform, etc. So then you get people adjusted to another level of what was once shameful behavior being openly either racist or vulgar, discriminate in any way, being openly emotionally reactive and bullying people, being quick to take everything to the internet first without dealing with it internally and in private. Turns into like a little bit of a validation junkyard or a rage room. So then once you see that this behavior gets everybody on board, right? Now, the clicks, the shares, the likes, the comments, the engagement helps bring profits up. So even if you have the least entropic person, right, who really desires to see unity consciousness, you can draw them in, but the enlightenment content, the best content doesn't seem to really last for long in like quick dopamine hit type platforms with content like that. So you want them to almost start believing in extremist ideology as being the default ideology around them in hopes that they too, become kind of scared and they themselves become extremist. And now the kind of way to dodge this, anytime people start waking others up to preach about unity consciousness or advocacy or activism that isn't performative, that also doesn't require you to constantly be in suffering, then you can manufacture hatred expeditiously from another angle. Like, oh, like this person, what they're saying is useless. Yeah, it totally is useless. Like, be quiet and blah, blah, blah. And then everybody kind of starts hopping onto it. And these people who want to start waking others up, they just exit out. You break down human beings as much as possible with hatred from multiple sides so they can't even keep up anymore. And if they do try to self-regulate, they and you do try to come into center and bring that out to your environment, the elite already know about strength in numbers. So enough people can keep you in your entropic state. And this is the part I hate the most. It makes you feel guilty for being happy. It makes you feel guilty for focusing on your divine cosmic purpose, your dharma. It makes you feel guilty for taking care of your mental health, which doesn't mean you disappear into live, laugh, love, but you can definitely observe without absorbing what you see on the news. You want to get people into such a state of spiritual atrophy that if people do bring any light, the dark swallows them whole, and it's like a recursive function. It's almost like the elite, before it would be like they would have maybe more of an active hand in making this happen. But I think they've sort of realized that we just do this so well to each other that they have a high yield investment account of consciousness. They can sit back and let their darkness grow while they split and enjoy the consciousness profits. Then ultimately you get people into sort of the state we have today where it's like they're heavily isolated and they believe that everybody is out to get them. It's an us versus them mentality. No one wants to go outside. They're worried about what people think of them. They become individualistic, everyone's in fear, and they don't expand their minds anymore because now they're kind of locked up in their own home and they're only seeing what the screen is showing them, which this yes, there's real people on here, but that's not all of reality. And you get hyper independence, hyper vigilance, hyper everything. You're backed into a corner. You're fearful, you're angry, you're hateful, and you only have your phone. This is the final boss. You wouldn't go and check out that data for yourself anymore because of what weaknesses, which we all have, myself included, what weaknesses you have that people can prey upon. Now you can be the easiest to control in this way. So we've knocked out social media. Just remember, hate is manufactured and fear is capitalized upon. Political narcissism. Getting involved in politics as a concept is really wonderful. Being informed is an attractive quality. But what I see is that so much of being involved in politics is wanting to feel like you're a good person or that you're smart. And if you don't have a god, politics becomes your god. This line is sort of rage bait, but what I mean is if you don't have a purpose or connection to the cosmos or something larger than life for yourself, politics becomes that purpose, which is pretty sad considering it's designed to keep you in cycles. And again, this doesn't mean running for office or trying to make, greater change. It means just constantly being stuck and looking at mass media and content, right? I would say you could actually think of it as Earth's samsara. It really does keep you in cycles. And I want everybody, I really don't care who is listening. You never want to say a whole group of people are bad or good. Okay? If someone believes they are just so pure and good, they also feel like they've always been the victim. They believe they can do no wrong then. And when they finally cause harm for them because they've identified, again, they may not be doing this consciously. It doesn't mean that they still don't have negative impacts towards others. They can say it came from a good place, out of self-defense because they were extremely hurt. If someone believes that they are doomed, that they are damaged goods, they will always assume that their actions are bad and that there's no room for evolution, growth, or anything of their creation, that there's no way their mind could be positively impactful. So nothing gets done, or they just say, screw it, might as well go full-blown villain mode. When we look at what is happening in the world, do you see how the corrupt leaders who profit off of innocent lives lost, the wars, genocide, starvation, ecocide is just a macro version of what we do internally and interpersonally? So these two bullet points that I brought up here, like that first one, I'm sure you could link it to something going on in the world. But what if I were to tell you that these two bullet points I brought up almost perfectly described a relationship I was in the past? This really made me think about how different is what's going on. We tend to separate large scale things from small scale things, but they exist together. Everything starts with some type of seeds. And let me take accountability. As someone who has been made to feel throughout their whole lives by everybody that they are doomed, they're damaged goods, they're this, they're that, you don't even believe that anything negative you say would have an impact on others because people just don't listen to you. And so I have inadvertently caused harm towards others in their emotions and their feelings about me and the feelings about the world just because of who I was. I had to exit this binary thinking cycle. Okay, we can never say any group of people is one thing or another, okay? So for those who don't believe that this interpersonal stuff, internal stuff has an impact on large scale systems, how do you think we got here in the world? Because none of this happened overnight. Why do you think I emphasize focusing on your mind with these lectures? Your own sovereignty, your own sense of Shivoham, which means I am Shiva, I am that quantum coherence of cosmic consciousness, ensuring that you have that empowerment with your own. This is exactly how we got here. We didn't realize that our consciousness was being hijacked because the plan was so smooth and perfect until the world is burning and we sit here wondering how it happened. Because if it was obvious, if you went from this jump to that jump, then you'd be like, okay, well, this is a jump. But if it happens a little slowly and you get adjusted to things over time, in a sense, you're with that somatic integration with time, you're consenting to that reality taking its form because you accept it and act on it and with it, right? And hopefully not when it's too late, but it can get there. I believe we will get out the same way we got in, but we can definitely get out faster collectively if we are very serious about wanting to exit cycles and birth new realities. Got political narcissism out the way. Let's talk about identity politics. So, specifically from the standpoint of philosophy and enlightenment content, when we obsess is the key word here. If you obsess over identity politics, you keep the old world alive. And Sanatana Dharma in Tantra, which is the sister beliefs are Kashmiri Shaivism and Tibetan Buddhism, you are welcome no matter who or what you are. There is literally no discrimination. The only metric is the Spandakaraka, the doctrine of vibration, what I refer to as the great cosmic meritocracy. Tantra is it is what it is type of philosophy, which is focused on consciousness and energy, not your human identity. It's also about what you're not saying, which can be the loudest, which is sometimes quietly admitting that there is a supremacy and that there's people who are better than you. And when we constantly add like another label to ourselves, it's another way to almost ask to be seen, to be recognized as this unique niche essence of consciousness. And this could be an extension of asking for something outside of you, an externalized form for love and validation. And outside of this, any philosophy that centers enlightenment, non-dualism, and unity consciousness, I've mentioned this before, asks us to dissolve the ego, identity, and the mind. This does not mean you ignore history or you ignore education, you ignore accountability. It just means that thing I said about the stars. Can we please just take a moment to see that we are beyond what this world is trying to force us to be? Nobody wants to be in a box. I understand that. But it doesn't help if we keep trying to add more angles and dimensions to that box. We just need to remove that containment altogether. There are oppressive systems at play, but the best way to dissolve them is not only fighting them, but also out creating them. And a lot of times, this is where I get frustrated with people because everyone has a unique way they contribute to harmony in this reality on this planet. So there are people who do their holy work in like mutual aid community group work in this regard, more direct help. There are people who are out creating systems entirely and establishing a new philosophy, a new world, a new paradigm. Maybe they're innovating new structures and new devices that will help people. But if people are doing what their highest selves would do, then when we're fighting systems, we're playing by their rules and the cycle continues. Maybe the real and only identity we need to be aligning with is what our highest selves are. And if you remember from previous season one lectures, it is being in alignment with Dharma that is really what you want. There is no being yourself as the static entity at each moment of time. It is the dynamic you that exists outside of space time. There's the highest version of you that is timeless. Like I said before, like anything you would have loved as a child, you still love now and likely will love forever for the rest of your life. That is your unique, these parameters for the great cosmic equation for your consciousness that helps you produce your best work in society and that helps you contribute in your unique role to the great cosmic harmony on planet Earth. I wanted to throw in a little calculus in here. It's not a whole lot, but if anyone's ever taken the class, I remember Riemann sums from AP Calc in high school. And really the idea was learning about integrals, right? So we kind of start here at this stage. And when you learn about integrals and wanting to get the area between in underneath a curve, initially it started out with like, what if we, measure to the best of our ability with a few rectangles? And they have quite a large width, right? And there's no way, look at this. There's a gap over here. There's a gap over here. There's an overflow here and an overflow here. How are you getting the accurate area under the curve? So the solution is, well, look, what do you see as the commonality in the progression? The width gets tinier and tinier and tinier of these rectangles. And eventually, as you can imagine, when they become like the width of like a tenth of a nanometer, then you are getting infinitely like thin lines stacked up underneath the curve. And that is when you would have the most accurate representation. Why did I bring up Riemann sums with identity politics? Because I see these rectangles as different forms of labeling an identity. I see the area under the curve as our dynamic essence of the fullest spectrum of our consciousness. While it is great to be able to have categorizations and ways to understand one another and to have context and maybe have an idea of what the person is and how they would show up, it gets rather inefficient if you think about it, because the list would become longer for each label. The more you think about who you are at any point in time. Maybe here's 2003. Maybe this is 2033. I don't really know, right? But you will never stick to one way of being throughout your whole life. And that is me basically making a case for how, even again, keyword obsessing over identity politics keeps you within one part of the area under the curve of your essence. Okay, the final boss of propaganda. But remember, propaganda feeds on ego. So what do you think the final boss would be? Intellect. Think about it. When you think about other groups of people that you make fun of, and you're like, oh, there's a trend right now too. Propaganda I'm not falling for. It's like all over social media. And they're all completely different things. Someone's falling for something. Okay, I am not saying a universal idea. And this actually perfectly feeds into this slide, right? Because when you think, okay, see, those people, they're the ones who get affected, not me. But here's the catch. For their level of consciousness, it's not obvious to them. That's why it works. But to you, it's obvious. That's why it doesn't work on you. So do you think you're magically removed from any type of influence? Right? When we think about being informed and that being the reason that we're much more intellectual, what is unsaid? I'll tell you, it's externally informed. We are pressuring ourselves to always have external data, and that being the only way of having information. The root of this final boss of propaganda would be, I would say, that intellect, that last ego attachment that we have. Because the more I have spent time listening to my own voice, like last 7 to 8 months, being almost entirely in solitude, researching and learning, and just thinking about everything, I've realized that everyone and everything is a distraction. And I don't mean this in a way where it's like I'm not going to be friends that be kind, whatever. But it has the potential. I should have worded it that way. Sorry, the potential to be a distraction if it takes you away from your purpose. And not everyone will use what they see from the external world to be a politician or act on this knowledge. They might actually do more harm because you don't know how they would react or educate themselves or unlearn or relearn or deconstruct. You never know. So why is there an obsession for everyone to be involved with the same thing if they're not planning on doing anything as a result? The more mad you are, sorry, it doesn't mean you got things done in society. It just makes you feel special because you somehow, by having, more privilege, feel super guilty, and you want to identify with people who are suffering the most around the world. Mind you, these people might not even be kind to the person right next to them. I mean, here's the line in itself, like you're more mad all the time, right? And you're denying what opportunities you may have with you to actually get things done. Which brings me, and if there's one thing you take away from this, please let it be this. Suffering is for research. Joy is for creation. Burn it into your eyelids. Joy is that seed from which we create the best things in the world. You can't get anything done when you're suffering. And I strongly want to argue against constantly feeling like you should be in shame, in fear, in guilt, and in anger to prove that you're a great person. Someone in a terrible state of mind will not produce their best work. They will be catalyzed and inspired to do so because they don't want to experience that again. But that would be following this first part, that suffering is for research. It's for learning, researching internally, just as much as you're doing externally. And that's why I'm talking about the final boss of propaganda altogether. Because if we're only looking at being informed about ourselves from something external, then we won't recognize our inner intellect. And if we can't recognize our inner intellect, how can we find that joy? How can we find that connection to our highest selves, our cosmic selves? And if we can't connect to that, then how are we able to create a reality where people can benefit and finally get the hell outside of this propaganda and its final bosses? You always need to ask yourself whenever you're on these apps, and you start again, even if you're the least entropic person and you see enough extremist ideology that gets you acting out of character, ask yourself who benefits from you being angry and hateful. Okay, because culturally speaking, yes, bad people have always been around. And maybe I could be wrong, just based off of my observations, it just seems like it's celebrated to be this type of way. And it just, even with the person I had been staying with, I just kept thinking, wow, this is a distraction. This is a distraction. Like nothing got done, but just being in like a lot of cycles in poor planning of life. Again, it's not to victim blame, but what I will say is a lot of genuine victims that have been able to get out of a situation have not had that victim mentality. I know this from several years of all sorts of dark, demented, inhumane experiences myself, where I had to make a choice of what kind of character I wanted to be in my own story. And from my experiences in being in government housing, from being unhoused, from being around some of the worst people I've ever met, you just kind of see that they are also constantly involved in cycles as well. And you can get involved in that cycle too. When you look at bad home lives where parents are doing all sorts of torture and abuse to one another and to you as well, they are just reacting and putting out all this horrid reality and energy with their ability to create from suffering rather than joy because they didn't use their suffering for research. They just stayed in cycles. What are you being distracted from? How can you be more ethically selfish? That's also a great question to ask. Because if we're all this upset over things that, we find on our phone to kind of talk about and fight about, we could be treated like sheep. How can you have the opportunity to birth new realities when you're vibrationally locked into the density of the current one? In order for a reality to gain more density, it needs strength in numbers and time. The more vibrationally locked in you are, the more that density will calcify, making it more difficult to get out. Your currency here would be your attention and energy, which is much more expensive than physical money. And as I share all of this with you, we are practicing karma yoga. Just like in physical yoga, when your instructor says, if this isn't part of your practice, you can try this instead with like a micro expansion or like a yoga block. In the physical sense, I'm offering a consciousness micro expansion, right? Because Tantra, reality, Spandakarika, the cosmos, they really don't care about you doing anything perfectly. They just care about you realizing that first, the seed of it all is that awareness. So as you upgrade your consciousness, it may be slow, which might be better because your nervous system gets adjusted to great things over time. Even my somatic therapist had said, because I suffered with DPDR, psychosis, and schizoaffective symptoms when I had moved out here. And even for really great things that happen in your life, if you're only used to, like for my life, 24 years of abuse, then even something that feels like heaven is going to rock your world so much internally. It can freak you out. You might reject it. You might ignore it. You might neglect it. You might not find yourself worthy of it. So allow for micro expansions. I'm not asking you to change things overnight either. Like I said, it takes time. So as you respond to reality in a different way, or maybe try thinking a little bit differently, again, take what feels good, leave what doesn't, but see if reality does not slowly upgrade around you. And as you respond to that upgrade, then there's a bigger upgrade that can happen. It's not linear. You'll have your dips, but always ask yourself what that moment is trying to teach you. That suffering is for research, and the joy is for that creation. Now, let's talk about the removal of the multiplicity of consciousness. The reason we have a desire to control what others do with their mindset, their body, their desires is somehow we have been taught that their sovereignty is a threat to ours. By removing their existence, we can feel safer in our existence because we don't feel like their existence turns into this virus that infects the collective consciousness and therefore affects us and our safety and our desire to live the way we want. And I'm still working on how to resolve that feeling. I mean, this is probably the hardest like problem in the universe, right? But what I want to just add is that the concept of God is infinite, which includes everything ranging from infinitely bad to infinitely good. And results may vary on the definition of what that is because the cosmos just are. It is our observation that decides what that thing's value is. So when we remove that multiplicity of consciousness and just pretend like a certain half of things don't exist, certain people don't exist, we are only trying to have a slice of God. You're trying to have something finite be your infinite. Interesting. And I also dislike this, but it is true. I need to thank my biggest enemies because without their existence, I wouldn't be allowed to exist. If there's someone like me, there is the diametrically opposed version of me as well, because the cosmos work in polarities and the multiplicity of consciousness is everywhere, everywhere. There's all types of realities on this planet, and each one has its own polarity as well. Look at this red. It's just the color red, and yet there are multiple shades, each carrying a unique hex value. That's what these things are at every level here. I'm sure you probably saw this on Microsoft Paint, or maybe not. I don't know what the age range is of people here, but the hex values map to an address in computer memory. The more high resolution a screen is, the more colors and shades are displayed, and the harder the computer works to display it. Similarly, the more nuance or shades of thought you are able to carry, the more high resolution your consciousness is. This doesn't mean you have to ignore, oh my God, please do not ignore your energetic boundaries, okay? To have a personality means to have a differentiated piece of consciousness, which is still considered divine in Tantra. Every kernel is considered divine. It doesn't mean accepting things that are wrong for you. It doesn't mean you sacrifice yourself and just be all happy la-di-da with it. If those thoughts are what came to your mind, ask yourself maybe where those narratives come from. Do you notice how, like, when we think of a different idea, we just automatically, and maybe I'm projecting, because initially that's what I thought too. Acceptance of the existence of everything means accept into my life? No, no. Just accept that the cosmos are infinite, so there will be infinite creations. And you don't have to like them, you just have to be aware that they exist. This isn't about religious tolerance anymore, like the Quaker religion, and just being like, oh, yeah, that's the solution to everything, right? Because even that structure, that externalized concept of God, it comes from the ego. It comes as a way to control people and keep certain cycles going and profit in some ways, right? So this isn't, we need to think beyond. We can't keep doing the same things we've been doing. We need to think beyond religious tolerance. Can we allow multiple truths to exist without believing that we can get harmed? I still struggle with this, okay? But we just need to also remind ourselves, can you truly have a full rainbow without every micro nuanced shade of color? On suffering. Like I said, this is about dark consciousness, so it's a tough topic. I myself have a lot to learn about cyclical, energetic natures that manifest in reincarnation and karmic imprints. Saying that suffering serves a purpose and everything happens for a reason, I know that, like, if I'm going through my worst of worst times and people tell me, like, oh, don't worry, there's a plan with all of this. And maybe there's a plan for my fist in your face. No, I'm just kidding. But this rubs people the wrong way for great reason. Like, we need to let suffering be what it is instead of trying to escape it. Especially if there is no scientific, complex basis with which there can be a purpose. Like, if people could see that, that would be one thing, but people aren't seeing that. They are being harmed and hurt. So, what I will say is this: if there is something not meant for you in this life, and your ego is what's attached to it, not your soul. Okay. Because that's part of, those are the parameters of your great cosmic equation. Okay. For the output being your dharma. But if your ego is attached to something that's not meant for you, there is going to be suffering in removal of said thing. So, like, I don't know, if you got like a piercing that is not the best look for you, I'm sorry about this metaphor, it's not like the best, but like when you try to remove it, it's going to be super slow. And I might almost imagine like the pain is worse trying to get rid of something that, doesn't belong because I so badly want it to belong, but it's not meant to be there. The stronger the attachment, the more powerful the pain. I encourage you on the topic of suffering to think about any time in your life where it felt like life, people, the universe, these systems were hitting below the belt, almost as if something outside of you, something bigger than you, knew about your deepest triggers that only you would have been aware of, and somehow it played out in real life. I want you to think about how it felt like something was playing a game with you. Does reality feel like it's just messing with you and it's just being unfair and cruel? But did that also force you into a change that was probably necessary that may not have happened unless something felt that deeply personal and painful? Let's also connect the dots on the concept of desire. We hear that desire causes suffering. Tantric philosophy defies that because desire or kama is one of the four pillars. The difference is between that soul and ego desire. And suffering comes from the egoic desire. As I said, your best output has parameters it requires in your great cosmic equation. So let's maybe do a cosmic refinement session with yourself tonight. Think about things you've always loved since you were a kid, and like maybe things and this takes time because the subtler you go, the more you go within, the greater and more complex the data is that comes out. You will find your soul desire there. And maybe you might realize it was always there with you all along. Maybe instead of a physical set of mountains being around you. There were always pictures of it, or it was always in movies when you were a kid. But what's most important to you is going to reveal itself to you. But are you listening? Why else would we be on Earth if we're supposed to lack desire, goals, connection, etc., in our unique way? So, just how can we find our soul's desires? We must channel our highest self, the Atman version of you, the nonlinear consciousness that exists outside of space time, which is connected to your meat suit right now. No one is coming to save you. There's no source outside of you. Good news and bad news, right? When you're calling upon anything to save you and it works, it was still you, just not perceivable by the experiential data packaged in time at this unit of measurement. You have to think about total experiential data when you live life day to day, right? Like we are perceiving 3D, but we only see in 2D. So to be fully involved in this 3D, you have the background and foreground imagery, the five senses and those experiential datas, and the communication from other containers of consciousness could look like human beings, right? It takes up all of your inputs powers, like all of your orifices, orifi, whatever the plural for orifice is, but inputs in your and nerves and everything, right? It takes all that power to have presence of mind and to render everything in this, sort of gameplay. So when we are asking for help, because we can only see ourselves within this meat suit at a particular moment of time, it will look like something outside of us always helped us. And it kind of actually makes you think about a new definition of what self-sufficiency sufficiency can look like. Because what is that boundary between you and something outside of you? When we're channeling, right? If you're in meditation, if you're trying to talk to yourself, I spend a lot of time talking to myself. I have been since I was 4 years old. I have a whole other personality, alter ego. We have this idea that we cannot, when we think of something that feels outside of us, then we didn't create those thoughts. It was something else. Are these thoughts ever something created, or have we just improved our filters and our ego's attachment to what our personality is supposed to be sort of rejects a new way of thinking? Let's take it a step further. Pratitya Samuptapada, we are all connected. Is there anyone who is not you? Like, for example, I had a lucid dream happen that I try to concoct after a sleep paralysis demon that I was really actively trying to, because I had heard that if you can control your subconscious, you can control your reality. So I've been working super hard on my darkness. And, I have a few role models. In this one, Carl Sagan's form showed up. And one of the questions I asked was, are you the real version of him? And he was like, why does it matter? And I was like, what? I'm making this up as I go, right? It's my dream. And eventually comes down to Carl Sagan saying, I'm just you talking to yourself, but it makes you feel better to use my voice and my body and my face on top of this because you are insecure about your own intellect. You couldn't believe that you would talk yourself out of something like this with your own intelligence. So it makes sense if it's someone who looks like me, but I'm just you, which is what made me ask, is there anyone who is not you? What is the difference between you and the person next to you? And when you feel like you're channeling something and it's like, you think about, oh, did someone possess you and take you over? What's that vibratory boundary, huh? What is you and your consciousness versus what's not? Because I'm going to guess that we decide that based on how long certain qualities have stuck within this meat suit for a period of time. And then if something feels new, it's novel, that can't be us. Who are you? To what level do you decide that within these constraints of knowledge, this is you, but if it feels too profound or maybe too dark or too intense, too anything, then it's not you? Where could dark cosmology and dark consciousness overlap? When you take the concept of dissolving boundaries to the highest level, I'm saying let's not hold back. Let's get far. We run into the concept of possession, right? People, I've heard a lot about this in India, actually. A lot of people being possessed and taken over. You hear about this in a variety of different belief systems. You see it in psychiatric disorders. Possession implies that some other consciousness is taking over yours. But what is yours? This is yet another place where I know people will turn off their ears and be like, possession, this and that, like exorcism, because we don't like the terminology. I don't like it either because of what it implies and how it keeps people in that lower state and stigmatizes them and doesn't alchemize this and talk about what could really be going on at a scientific level. I invite everyone to think about this because there's a lot of people affected by this and they're in true suffering and they're ignored on this planet. And their issues likely stem from ancestral or generational or current life trauma. I mean, and also like, could there be something within their filters of consciousness in this universal field in their brain that due to certain cognitive functions not being healthy, these filters they decay or they are not as powerful as they should be, and it can invite other types of thought and aberrations of consciousness, which is going to be all my focus for season 2. Could that be what's going on? When we ask ourselves who we are, we have to consider the thoughts we create. But when we understand that the brain is a filter of the universal field of consciousness, there can be unconscious consent to other elements of that same field entering the mind. We need more sophisticated technologies to measure what neurosomatic channels are open, probably unconsciously, which allow for this and why. This is going to go beyond Western medicine and traditional talk therapy. I'm trying to go for a cosmic root cause analysis here. This can happen with psychedelics in a positive way. Where I've experienced having these two once, and that's a whole other mind-blowing, thing. And it made me think about all of this. Considering everything as a polarity, what if we experiment with those filters that happen in the negative direction, where you see hallucinations, possession, flashbacks, delusional behavior, numbness from the body, etc.? First, we would need to be able to identify whether there was an internal projection of what's coming from internal trauma from this lifetime, or was there actually an ability to perceive more that's happening externally. So we need to differentiate between the two. If the person is able to perceive more that's going on beyond them, we would need to be able to quantify, measure, and somehow replicate, knowing that the results wouldn't be exactly the same. But we would have to change the way we operationally define variables of like equal impact with each observer. So for example, like everyone's version of the worst experience in the world feels different, but if this perceived darkness was able to affect everyone in the same way, where they all would equally say, hey, this was the worst experience in the world, then that feeling is what we would want to capture rather than the objective data that gave you the feeling, because the data itself becomes subjective upon observation. A new frontier for consciousness, cosmology. What's unseen or not yet thoroughly researched in cosmology could be the clue for healing in the collective. We see many patterns repeating from macro to micro scales and beyond tangible research and space travel pursuits. I mean, there gets to be a point of like, I don't know if you worry about timescape cosmology. I mean, what's all that astral travel going to really do for you after a certain point? I feel like that data makes the most sense to apply to human consciousness when you're thinking about direct impact. The quantum field itself is theorized to be conscious. Remember the Purna mantra I brought up in season 1? Okay, how we are pulled from that infinite, which is the cosmos, and in being finite and having these meat suits, we are still infinite from within. The data just keeps going on forever the deeper you zoom in. And subtracting from that infinite to make us, is that thing is still infinite. And even if someone tries to take something from you If you can hold on and remember the Purna mantra and the what, how, and the why, subtracting from infinity, you are still left with infinity. You are always infinite. So if we are pulled from that, then why don't we use that thing's behavior to help us understand our own, since there's fractal behavior through all of the creations within the cosmos and its nested creations and patterns that it repeats. We see shamans worldwide having the ability to heal with something unseen, but people cast doubt because there's not enough measurability applied via scientific method. Totally valid. We see that Western approaches don't always work for everyone. We keep finding new ways to numb ourselves and stigmatize people rather than empowering people to get themselves out of it. It seems we have reached an impasse with the world of the esoteric and the scientific. But since I'm the one who's creating these lectures, I say not really. Okay, what do we do wrong? We keep trying to create a theory of everything. Okay, a one size fits all model for all infinite creations of the cosmos, and that's supposed to solve all their aberrations of consciousness. How do we help? Okay, here's my hot take. We help people with the highest form of technology that cannot be created with current science and math. And if you remember what Frederick Fagan had brought up about scientism and how consciousness actually creates, math and science. So how would you explain more with less? So, I mean, I took a lot of inspiration from that quote and some of my own personal experiences that aligned with that. And I believe we will help people recognize what is going on with the most potent technology of all, consciousness. We are really powerful forms of technology at a electromechanical level with our bodies, but what is housed within is even more intelligent. We can call that inner technology. It's subjective in a great way to where it can help people with their individual needs. If we can help them access their inner technology, how brilliant. You wouldn't have to rely on something external. And you could train people with this. I don't know, the possibilities are endless. And it's objective in a great way that everyone experiences this. So diluting this with just a uniform model as we have it in Western paradigms today, like we either need to leave it behind or we need to stack upon it. Because I know there's some foundational things, since we are all one, we have some foundational principles that apply to all of us. But beyond that, we're all unique and we need to start honoring that. It's time for a new way of looking at the hard problem of consciousness. And me creating this, my life's work, Shivoham Labs' work, will devote itself to finding a way. Thank you so much for listening. Welcome to season 2. It's going to be super exciting. I know this was pretty heavy. This is going to be reflected in future lectures throughout as well. We really want to build a better tomorrow. We don't want to black box ignore anything. I think we are in both a time of, if we make room for the duality of things burning up around us, I have noticed that there is an uprise in people not wanting to give up and to bring people back to center. And together we can help make that dream very much a reality. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.